What's going on, everybody? Giancarlo Bodoni here with BJJ Fanatics once again, and today's topic is going to be wrestling up from guard. Okay, so what we're looking to do in this instructional is set up wrestle ups, okay, in a way that gives us the highest degree of success to actually complete our reversals. So typically, when you think about wrestling up, taking shots on your partner's legs, we associate that with a high degree of effort. What we want to think about doing is putting our training partner in the most vulnerable possible position to where we're going to have the highest degree of success with wrestle ups. And the way that we do that is by starting with jiu-jitsu techniques and then finishing with the wrestle up. The vast majority of reversals in no-gi grappling are as a result of wrestle ups. So we think about using classical jiu-jitsu sweeping methods to create the opportunity for us to come up into top position and wrestle up. All right, guys, so as we start rolling into this video, we're going to basically try to look at all the techniques that we're going to cover in this instructional with a basic philosophy in mind, right? And then there's going to be a lot of smaller concepts that fall into play kind of depending upon what little position that we're in, whether we're in a seated guard or whether we're going against a kneeling opponent, a standing opponent, etc. But in general, when you look at wrestling up, all right, in no-gi grappling, the way that you want to look at it, or a good way for you to look at it, is that no matter what reversal you're looking to use in jiu-jitsu, whatever sweeps you're looking to initiate, whatever attacks you're looking to initiate, when it comes to reversing your partner and going in from bottom position and just looking to solidify top position, the basic philosophy, right, the basic principle here is that you start with jiu-jitsu and you finish with wrestling. So if you look at the sport of no-gi grappling and you can compare it to gi grappling, in the gi, there is a massive discrepancy compared to no-gi with as it relates to wrestle ups. All right, so if you look at sweeps with a gi on or reversals with a gi on and reversals without a gi, there are so many reversals with a gi on that don't require the act of wrestling up because of the fact that you have sleeves, you have lapels, you have collars, you got pant grips, you got all sorts of different grips that you can hold on to that make the act of sweeping, I don't want to say easier, but it just makes it different. Okay. So there's a lot of crossover in the techniques. There's a lot of similarities in the techniques. The goals are the same, but the way that you execute them and the way that you typically enter into them from neutral positions changes. Okay. So what we're looking at is the finishing, right? The way that you complete the reversal. The execution of the reversal is significantly different from gi to no gi. Okay. So that's where this basic philosophy comes from. So if you look at wrestling up, if you look at it just kind of in the conventional way where I'm sitting in front of a standing opponent, I just go in and I shoot a single or a double. That's great. That's one way to look at it. But there's the expansion of wrestle ups goes far beyond that. Right. So the reason why this video is at the end of this series is because it kind of sums up the reversal portion of all the stuff that we looked at in the previous instructionals. So we looked at before or all the individual systems, and the reversals are kind of like your jiu-jitsu one-on-one reversals, still very effective. But as you start going against higher and higher level opponents, it becomes more and more difficult to reverse them. Right. The higher the skill level, the higher the athleticism, becomes increasingly more difficult. So you have to get used to this idea of wrestling up on your partner. And so you don't have to initiate with a wrestle up, but you typically want to finish with a wrestle up, right? The execution of the reversal comes from a wrestle up. So as a general philosophy, and you're going to notice it not just in this video, but as you guys go and you start sparring in the gym, it might be something that you subconsciously understand, but you don't realize it when you're actually doing it, right? So you might be sparring and you might subconsciously almost sweep your partner and then come up and finish with a wrestle up. And if you look at high level competitive no-gi grappling, the vast majority, like we're talking upwards of 80 or even 90% of the reversals in high level competition, talking about like ADCC and things like that, usually start with jiu-jitsu and finish with wrestle ups. So you're playing guard, you hit a traditional jiu-jitsu 101 sweep, a reversal, some sort of an ashigarami knockdown, some sort of an inversion that stumbles, off balances your partner, puts them in a position where you can then finish by coming forward and wrestling up. Something that's a little bit that's not always required when you have a gi on, right? If you can go and you can knock your training partner down with a gi, a lot of times you have a pant grip, a lot of times you have a sleeve grip, you have a lapel grip that you can use to help prevent your training partner from getting up, and you can use that to complete the reversal. With no gi, because you don't have access to those grips, and because the grips that you have are more or less temporary, okay, depending upon what the grip is. Like a grip on the ankle versus a grip on the pants is significantly more or less robust. So if I try to hit a move that might be look like the exact same move, the difference between those grips makes it just increasingly more difficult to finish that reversal if I don't wrestle up, right? So that's just kind of the general philosophy as it goes into wrestle ups. You can absolutely initiate with wrestle ups, but a large portion of the video that we're going to go into is going to be starting with jiu-jitsu and finishing with wrestle ups. So it kind of sums up the series that we've been looking at. Okay. And you're going to see a lot of crossover and a lot of the techniques that we've looked at in the previous instructionals from all the different types of guard and the systems that we've looked at. And we're going to look at how that ties into and chains with wrestle ups. Okay. And if you can master this portion, it's going to make executing the stuff that we looked at in the previous instructionals significantly higher. Your percentage of success is going to be significantly higher as it relates to reversals. All right, guys, so when we're looking at reversing somebody or just kind of attacking in general, it always starts with some sort of break in your training partner's stance, some sort of break in their fundamental posture. So with any given position, offensive or defensive, there's a posture that's more or less ideal, right? Independent of the actual situation. For the purposes of what we're talking about today, we're playing guard, our opponent is in passing, right? And so there's a variety of different stances that your training partner can present to you. And it's up to us if we want to get some sort of meaningful offense to start with an off balance. And all an off balance does, right? This idea of creating off balance, creating Kazushi, all it does is it creates a break in your training partner's stance. And that break in your training partner's stance creates extension sometimes. Okay. It creates opportunities for attack, right? So if I want to go into a submission, I have to extend my training partner's limbs. Okay. Say I want to go into an armbar. Say I want to go into a triangle. I have to create some degree of limb extension, leg locks, whatever. And that will create the opportunity for me to isolate that limb and then go into the attack. So same thing with a reversal, right? I need to off balance my partner in such a way that I break their stance. And the more I can break their stance, the higher the likelihood of me being able to get that reversal, right? The higher the degree of, the chance that I have of success. Depending upon the degree of off balance that I can create. So when it comes down to reversing people, from guard, I like to look at it when I'm grappling. I like to look at 4 specific cues. Okay. And let's call it, there's 4 specific cues. 2 of them will be kind of in the same category, more or less. I mean, you can argue one way or another depending on the specific situation. But the 4 cues that I look at is either a stumble from your partner, a hand to the mat, a knee to the mat, or their butt to the mat. Okay. So if I can get any of these 4 things to happen, I know that I've off balanced my partner. Now, the degree of the off balance is going to vary. So there's a hierarchy here. So I like to look at it in three stages, right? So there's a hierarchy of 3, right? And you can get, complex. You can argue one way or the other, but to simplify it, I look at it in 3 degrees of off balance. So the stumble that we talked about, I would say that that's the lowest tier, right? So you've off balanced your partner, but not enough to get their hand to the floor, their hips to the floor. Getting a knee or a hand to the mat, I would almost put those in the same category as like a second tier. Okay. That middle tier. And then the highest tier would be getting their hips to the floor. So all that's happening is that the higher the tier, the higher the likelihood of success for reversing your partner, specifically with a wrestle up. The lower the tier, there's still a likelihood, it's just less. Okay, so you gotta have these 3 tiers, right? The stumble, that'd be your lowest. Somewhere in the middle is a combination between a hand to the mat or a knee to the mat, Sometimes the hand of the mat might be a little stronger than a knee to the mat. Just kind of depends on the situation. As we progress through the videos, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. And then the highest tier, inarguably, is getting your training partner's hips or their butt to the mat, right? If I can touch their hips to the mat, now my likelihood of being able to come up and complete the reversal is significantly higher. So let's just quickly show you guys just some generic examples of what that might look like, okay, what those off balances might look like without going into the techniques that are going to stem off of them. So let's say, for example, I was looking at the lowest tier, right, which would be a stumble, right? A stumble would be, for example, let's say I was in open guard and I hit my training partner with a tripod sweep, or I attempted to hit my training partner with a tripod sweep. So I give a real attempt at the tripod sweep, and it does not off balance my partner. All it does is I get him hopping. Exactly. All I did is I created a little break in his stance. Not enough to sweep him, not enough to create any sort of real offense, but it creates action, right? It's an initiation into an action. So all I did was I just buckled my training partner's stance. Okay, so that would be like the lowest tier. We'll use the tripod sweep as the next example. Okay, so just for consistency, we'll stay with the tripod sweep. Let's say, for example, now I get my training partner's knee to the mat. So what'll happen is I go to off balance my training partner with a tripod sweep. He hops, and then he drops to a knee. Boom. Okay. You could see how that's a stronger off balance. Okay, because my training partner's level changed. Okay, so he was stumbled, and the stumble was strong enough to drop him down to a knee. Okay. This will kind of also adds to another concept, which is the more I can chain off balances on each other, the stronger they get. Okay, and I'll show you guys what I mean by that in a second. Third one we'll say is getting their hand to the floor. So let's say I go to off balance my partner and I just touch his hand to the mat. Boom. Okay. Again, you can argue whether or not this is stronger than getting their knee to the floor. Kind of depends on the situation, right? But I got his hand to the floor. And the third one, and again, for consistency, we'll use the tripod sweep. I bump him and I touch his hips to the mat. Okay. You can look at all four of these off balances and you could see why the first one compared to the last one is the weakest versus the last one being the strongest. And every single one that I showed, you can see that it's a greater off balance every time. So if I just buckled my training partner's stance, just got him to stumble, just got his knees to shake a little bit, it's a good off balance. But if I don't use it properly or quickly enough, a lot of times you won't get the reversal. You absolutely can, and we'll see how we can do that. But the more we create, the greater the degree of the off balance, the higher the likelihood of success, independent of what I'm looking to do. Okay, but specifically for reversals, got his knee to the floor, that means it's just a greater off balance. Got his hand to the floor, same thing, greater off balance. Got his hips to the mat, that's the best of all. Okay. To add to this, when you're looking to create off balances, what you have to do is you have to chain them on each other, and we've touched on this in a lot of the instructionals that we've looked at, okay, from in the series, okay, as far as guard play is concerned. But let's say, for example, I'm going against a fresh opponent. This guy's got good base. He's good. He's strong and he's athletic. And from this position, let's say I generated the first degree of off balance. Okay, so let's say from here I went into a tripod sweep and I just stumbled my partner. Well, if I don't do anything, he can reset his stance. Okay. But if I stumble him, and then from here I chain it with something else, I might get a greater off balance. So in this case, I went from a stumble to his hips on the mat. Might be his knee to the mat, might be his hand to the mat, right? So it really depends on the situation, depends on your opponent, depends on a lot of things. But I chained two off balances on each other, and it created a greater degree of off balance, okay? You can further build on this by not just chaining off balances, but chaining the directions. So the two off balances that I just did right now, I went from a tripod to a reverse tripod, right? It's techniques that we've seen in the previous instructions. They were all in a rearwards direction. I was trying to take Reese down backwards, right? The intention was to get him all the way down to his butt. I started by stumbling him, and then I added another off balance, another technique onto that to off balance my partner, and I got him down to his butt. There might be cases where that's not enough. So I have to start adding directions to that. So let's say, for example, again, we'll use the tripod sweep. Okay. You're going against a skilled opponent. I go and I stumble him. Now my training partner goes in, and then let's say, for example, I stumbled him, and from here he goes in and he swipes my leg off. So that now from here, I have to go in and I have to look to start off balancing him in a different directions. I take him forward. Now I got his hands to the mat. So remember we talked about the hierarchy? The first one was a stumble. Now I got his hand to the floor. Okay. As he's going in and looking to recover from this one, I might be able to get his hips to the floor. Okay. So you see I chained 3 off balances without letting him reset, without letting him generate his own offense. I maintained an offensive cycle the entire time. And with each subsequent move and each change of direction, I got a greater degree of off balance. So we covered the hierarchy, right? 4 cues that I look at, right? A stumble in your training partner's stance. You buckle the knees, you buckle the hips, you get them to just wobble. Lowest tier, still good, right? That's a good sign that I've off balanced my partner. A hand or a knee to the floor, that's another good sign, better than the first one that we looked at. So we're increasing, we're going to a higher tier, right? We're climbing this hierarchy. And the third one, getting their hips down to the floor. So 4 techniques, generally speaking, about 3 tiers, right? Because we talked about, like, I generally like to look at hand to the floor, knee to the floor as roughly in that same category, right? Depending on the situation. So to simplify it, we'll say 3 tiers and 4 cues. So I'm looking to climb that hierarchy. How do I climb the hierarchy? You create multiple off balances chained off of each other with no break in between. And to strengthen that further, not only do you chain them, but you off balance in multiple directions. You take them backwards, you take them forwards, you take them left, you take them right, you take them overhead, et cetera, right? And when you can do all those things, when you can do them in a sequence, you're going to get strong off balances, and that's going to further increase your likelihood of being able to complete the reversal, complete the wrestle up, okay, and get into top position. All right, guys, so we covered basic philosophy. We covered hierarchy of off balances, okay? Now let's cover what I think is going to be probably the most critical aspect to actually solidifying top position and completing the reversal, right? So this is fundamental to your ability to retain top position, okay? So if we look at it from a competitive aspect, right? If you look at the jiu-jitsu scoring criteria, a lot of times you might get close to reversing somebody, and it's great because you've created offense, you're fatiguing your opponent, you're doing all these things, you're generating offense. But ultimately, from a competitive aspect, you're trying to get points on the board. That's a sign that you're progressing your position, right? So we're looking to progress our position here. We're looking to go from bottom to top. Ultimately, from top, we're looking to get past our partner's legs, progress through a hierarchy of pins, and then go in for a submission, right? So that's kind of like the general trend of jiu-jitsu, right? That progression. So it'll vary depending upon how we go about reversing our partner. But ultimately, when it comes down to getting on top of your partner and staying on top of your partner, it comes down to 2 things, okay? And that's head and hip height, okay? I want to get my head over my partner's head. I want to get my hips over my partner's hips, okay? And you can get even more specific by saying, you want to get your training partner's hips between your knees and things like that, right? Depending upon the situation. But for the most part, head over head, hips over hips. If you can do that, you create a dilemma for your training partner, which is fundamental to securing top position. If you have head height and hip height and you've won that battle, now your partner has to choose between conceding to bottom position and just focusing on retaining guard and creating his own offense from guard, or saying, oh, I'm on bottom, I don't want to be scored on, I don't want to stay on bottom, I have to get up. And the thing about that is, yeah, they can get up, but if you have head height and you have hip height, their ability to get up without generating back exposure for you to take advantage of is little to none, pretty much, okay? So if you can maintain head and hip height, your partner has to expose their back in the process of getting up, okay? So let's look at what that looks like, right? So let's say, for example, I just put Reese down with a double leg. Let's say, for example, he was, let's go ahead and take a standing one. Good. So let's say, for example, I came up and I put Reese down with a double leg. Okay, I put him down here. So if you look at it, right, if you just took a still photo of this position here, you could see that Reese's head is higher than my head, okay? And my hips are technically higher than his hips relative to the floor, but my hips are certainly not above his hips, right, directly on top of them. So from here, like if Reese just didn't move from this position, he just decided to play guard, yeah, I got a nice sweep and I'm on top. Awesome. If you're competing, you score 2 points, that's great. If you're in the gym, you got on top of your partner, now you can start working towards passing their guard. But when I get into this position here, you're going against somebody who doesn't want to get reversed. If I just stay here and I start, for the sake of this position, I'm in a double leg, right? I'm hugging onto my training partner's legs here. His ability to get up and either just defend this position and not concede bottom, and even worse, potentially counter me and put me in a bad position. His ability to do that is, it's relatively high. I mean, compared to what it could be if I do just a couple of different things. So, for example, from this exact scenario, Reese has the ability to go in and hip heist, sprawl out. Now I'm fighting from an extended position. His body weight, so now my head's certainly not above his head, and my hips are lower than his. Even though his hips aren't on top of mine, they're still in a position where now I'm in a front headlock, and it's like, oh crap, now I got to defend my neck, I got to defend the back, I have to try to sit back to guard and free my head and start all over. Okay, that's absolutely not what I want. What I want is I want to solidify top position, right? So we'll take that exact same scenario and we'll start implementing head and hip height. Okay, critical aspect to staying on top of people. So I shot that double. I put my partner down to the floor. Okay, now from here I focus on getting my head on top of my partner's head and my hips above my training partner's hips. Okay, so from here I do a good job of staying over my partner, and then from this position I get over my training partner's head and hips. Okay, so even from here, without going into any sort of crazy details or technical control or what have you, as long as my head is directly above my partner's head and my hips are directly above his hips like they are now, okay? I don't have any sort of controls or anything like that. If Reese tries to get up, okay, the only way that he can get up is to get out from underneath me, okay? So he has to move away from me, get his hips out and away, and then now from here we can just technically get up and then from there move away. So if I'm able to maintain, if I'm able to prevent him, let's say, for example, with a body lock, I'm able to prevent his hips from moving away. Go ahead and try to move your hips away. Good, he can't do it. And if I'm able to keep my head above my partner's head, let's say I put him down here, okay? And I'm able to keep my head above my partner's head. When he tries to retain top position, go ahead. Okay, he can't do it. The only way he can do it is by turning away from me. When he does that, I cannot stop my partner from coming up to his hands and knees. But I can't get behind him. And when I'm behind him, guess what? Let's rotate a little. You can just go down to your elbows. When I'm behind him, guess what? My head's above his head and my hips are above my partner's hips. So now I'm in a great position to start creating attacks, to start throwing hooks in, to start taking my training partners back. Okay? You can use this concept from any position. Okay? So, or any reversal. So let's say I knocked my partner down with a tripod sweep. Okay? And I did your Jiu-Jitsu 101, stand up, and then come up and into top position. Well, when I come up into top position, if I just come up and I stay here, my hips aren't above his hips, my head is not above his head. I'm higher than him, but I don't have hip and head height as for like relative to him. So he can stand up. Now all of a sudden I'm in a scramble where I'm trying to stay on his leg. I could probably lose that leg if it's pretty slippery and things like that. So we contrast this to I put my partner down, and then I get head and hip height over him. Now you can see that my head's directly above his head, my hips are directly above his hips. And when he tries to stand up facing me, it's impossible. He can put his hands on me, he can do whatever he wants. He can push me away, he can try to do a technical stand up. Good, almost impossible. Okay? He has to physically move me off of him to be able to do that. But if he wants to turtle, he can do it. He can get all the way up to his hands and knees, but I'm going to be behind him, and I still have my head over his head. I still have my hips over his hips, okay? So that was a very, very basic and generic example of the key way of retaining top position and the dilemma that it puts your training partner in. If I get my head over their head and I get my hips over their hips, I'll be able to stay on top of them. And when I'm on top of them, with my head over their head and my hips over their hips, the only way that they can get up is by exposing their back to me. So it creates the dilemma. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to work really hard to try to get this guy off of me. So do I concede bottom, or do I just get up the easy way, which is turning my back, which is not really easy because he's carrying my body weight the whole time, but he can get up, but it comes at the cost of back exposure, okay, which is arguably the best position for me as the offensive guy to be into, okay? So we went over the key philosophy, went over how do we initiate, okay, with the greatest degree of success through off balancing, and then we went over the kind of finishing concepts, right, to getting on top and staying on top.